My name is Amanda Archer, and I'll serve as your facilitator today with the NJCRC. For those of you who are here for the first time, the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative is a network of coastal resilience professionals, and the purpose of this coffee chat program is to share information within this network and the public by using continuous and open communication to learn and leverage from each other's successes and failures, and to improve and enhance resiliency among coastal communities. The views expressed during this technical assistance coffee chat are the presenter's own and do not reflect the official policies or positions of the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative or any of its organizational partners. So today's coffee chat is about community standards for resilient, ecological, and accessible design. Joseph, I'll go ahead and let you share your screen. So WEDG, or Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, is a national rating system for resilient, ecological, and accessible design. It is a complement to the state's inland flooding rules and the New Jersey DEP Living Shorelines Guidance. WEDG is a tool to help municipalities realize better waterfronts for their communities. And today we'll hear from Joseph Sutkowi, who is the Chief Waterfront Design Officer in this session. We will explore the update to the WEDG standard, what it entails, and how municipalities can apply it to public and private sector development. So Joseph Sutkowi is the Chief Waterfront Design Officer at Waterfront Alliance. He holds a bachelor's degree in public policy from the University of Michigan and a master's of public administration from New York University's Wagner School. He is a member of the Urban Land Institute's New York City Infrastructure Product Council. He's a co-chair of a committee of the New Jersey Coastal Resilience Collaborative, and that would be the technical assistance work group. He is an advisory board member for the National Working Waterfront Network, and he's also a member of New Jersey Association of Floodplain Managers. So with that, I will let Joseph take the floor. And welcome, Joseph.
All right, good morning, everybody. So as Amanda shared, I am a co-chair of this committee, but I'm pretty sure that Amanda does about 95% of the work associated with that as the other co-chair. So she's giving me more credit than I probably have earned. But as she said, I lead the Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines for Waterfront Alliance. We'll today just walk through the standard with a particular lens on how it can be used from a community or municipality perspective, with the focus of these coffee chats really being about providing technical assistance for communities. We think that WEDG is actually a really useful tool in that regard for communities to use. So we're based out of Waterfront Alliance. Our mission is that together we build, transform, revitalize, and protect accessible waterfronts for all communities. We are primarily known for our work around New York and New Jersey Harbor, but have done a number of things that apply statewide in New Jersey. The recent flood disclosure legislation that was signed by the governor 3 or 4 months ago was a result of Waterfront Alliance's push in partnership with groups like New Jersey Future. And we've worked with the city of Camden on a number of occasions, including working with them on what's called the WEDG Addendum, which is a kind of custom version of WEDG just for Camden. So we're familiar with New Jersey, work there all the time, and WEDG is really meant to be a national standard, but the original version of the system was meant to be just focused on New Jersey and New York, that we've since expanded its applicability. Central to WEDG, the Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, and I'll make sure that I say that acronym the long way a couple times, Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines. Central to it are 3 basic principles that we're looking for across projects. We want to see projects be resilient, we want to see ecological benefit, and we want to see access. And access is defined pretty broadly. It's not just being able to put a kayak in the water. You can see that here. I like to use Brooklyn Bridge Park as an example of a site that does this well. And actually this picture as a place that brings these three principles in well. So if we look here, let's just talk about resilience first. So you can see the elevation changes in the pier. You've got protected water areas, you've got berms, you've got an upgraded stormwater system, both gray and green. You can't see it in this particular picture, but there's a marina at this site. It's just beyond the pier in the background. It's got a wave attenuator built into it. If you talk to the folks who run this park day in and day out, they're really confident that this site is going to withstand any storm that Mother Nature can throw at it so much better than any other park in the harbor, because they built in resilience from the beginning. From an ecology perspective, you have protected vegetated areas in the riprap there, and it's a little hard to see, but it's like right in the center of the photo. There are tide pools built in that provide ecological value. There's a tidal marsh here that also has stormwater filtration purposes. So you have a lot of really great ecological components of this park. And then access here is really unparalleled. So you can see the beach, you can see the kayakers, there's kayak launches and things at the site. There are get downs. But with WEDG, we also think about maritime access. So that 514 vessel is docked at the park. You have the marina that I referenced earlier. You also have 2 ferry stops here. You're adjacent to public transit. We look at access from a really broad set of, across a really broad range. And then all of this happens on an incredibly complex waterfront site. So you've got below this particular site, you've got subway lines that pose geotechnical issues. This is a former industrial port facility that had been owned by Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. That's actually Brooklyn Port Authority Marine Terminal in the background, active container facility next door. You've got the Brooklyn and Manhattan bridges running across this site. This was a complex site, and they were able to build in resilience, ecology, and access across all parts of the project. WEDG at its heart is a rating system. So you're going to be familiar with LEED. You're probably familiar with Envision. We are in the same vein and function in the same way as those standards, but WEDG, Waterfront Edge Design Guidelines, is tailored specifically to the waterfront because there's so many unique constraints of working on the waterfront and so many unique opportunities that you only can do, things you can only do on waterfront sites. And WEDG is meant to kind of maximize the value of those opportunities and work through with projects how you can take advantage of and work through the different constraints that are there. We're a points-based system. Different design features earn you a different number of points across the standard, and it's then a pass-fail system. Anything above 130 out of 250 possible points, so just over half, earns what we call WEDG verification. That means that the project has really met the gold standard for waterfront design. And we'll get into kind of what's in these credits in a couple minutes. So I think it's useful, particularly if you're coming from a municipality, to think about kind of how rating systems actually impact the development of projects and the development of waterfronts, because we're not the ones actually doing the design work. All the firms involved with Brooklyn Bridge Park get all of the credit for making that site great, and that's true of all of the WEDG verified sites. What rating systems can do is to help establish a set of consistent standards. Here are targets to meet. Here are benchmarks to aim for, and things that we have seen work across projects. They also can really celebrate the great projects. This is something that like elected officials and mayors and planning boards and stuff can kind of get excited about. It really draws attention to the projects that are doing this well. Excuse me. Really helps bring it around kind of marketing opportunities and public relations opportunities to show that, hey, our community is doing really great things. Westport, Connecticut, which has a few WEDG sites in the pipeline, they're doing really cool things on the waterfront, and they want people to know that. It helps set project targets, and it helps you aim for particular results. We find particularly in the kind of community engagement aspect of the project, being able to tell your community members, these are the things out of the WEDG standard that we want to go for. This is the number of points or the particular credits that we want to do really well in. That can really help guide the engagement process to be really productive, and help you share with the community, here are the priorities that are going to be great for you, and recognize that we're hearing what community members are saying in the process. And then doing all of this really helps push change across the field. So what we think of as kind of the theory of change for the rating systems is that WEDG is set up so that the best projects are the ones that are going to pursue and earn WEDG verification. Most waterfront sites, in the current field, most waterfront sites are not going to be high enough caliber to actually meet the standard. But if we celebrate those top 10-20%, that moves the rest of the field in line. And I think we see this in places like New Jersey with the inland flood standards, places like Boston that now are raising their sea level rise guidance in zoning requirements. As we get more and more attention on these great projects, the rest of the field starts to catch up, because we're setting the norm. So we keep pushing for better and better design, more resilience, better ecological health, better public access, and that moves the rest of the field to try to be better. So if we look at what are the WEDG verified sites, there's currently 12 across the country. There's about another 12 or so that are in the pipeline, including one in New Jersey. That'll be the first in the site. And what I want to draw your attention to, I showed Brooklyn Bridge Park at first, and that's one that, of course, Brooklyn Bridge Park can do this one. They had all the money in the world. They had all the political support in the world. Of course, they can make this work. But I want to draw your attention to the diversity of sites that are on this list. So we have Starlight Park in the Bronx, which is a small community park. Jose Marti Park in Miami is near downtown, but in a low-income area. Riverfront Park in Wilmington, North Carolina. That was a place where the elected officials said, hey, we want to show everyone that we're creating great spaces, because not many people think about Wilmington, North Carolina's downtown. We also have a number of industrial sites. So it's not just the public park spaces, but Sims Recycling in Brooklyn. Oak Point, McKinnis Cement in the Bronx have gone through WEDG. And there are a number of offshore wind developments in the pipeline. And of the offshore wind developers that bid in the most recent New Jersey BPU bid to build offshore wind facilities to serve New Jersey, all but one of those companies committed that they were going to use WEDG on their port facilities that they're going to own or lease. So you're gonna see, and the decision on who's winning those bids is still a few months away, I think, but you'll start to see a lot of movement in offshore wind and the WEDG standards, because we want those port facilities to embody resilience, ecology, and access. And then New York is doing the same thing, and all three of the winners of the recent New York offshore wind bid had commitments to WEDG involved, and there's another offshore wind site separate from that's currently in the pipeline. We've got affordable housing in here with Bronx Point. We've got residential and mixed use development and Domino Sugar and Greenpoint Landing. So WEDG can work on a lot of different types of sites. We're really set up to accommodate everything except single family homes. We can work public or private. There's a lot of flexibility in the system to allow that. So the WEDG verification process, just to go through this quickly, the first step is that the project owner, whether that is the municipality, whether there's a private developer, they're gonna sign an MOU with Waterfront Alliance, and then we do two different reviews. There's one at 50% design, technically optional, though most choose to do it. That allows the WEDG reviewers to give feedback on the design. Hey, here are ways that we can enhance the resilience. Here are opportunities that we see for ecology on the site. And then we do a review at 100% construction documents. It's the final review, and that's when you actually earn your wedge verification. So it's all pre-construction, which is kind of useful for a lot of projects. It means you're actively in it during the permitting stage, you're actively in it during community engagement. And then once you have wedge verification, then you kind of partner with Waterfront Alliance to really get the most mileage out of that announcement and the achievement. Waterfront Alliance project manages the review process, but we're not the ones who are actually doing the scoring. We're going to bring in a set of technical experts from different, typically consulting firms, though the reviewers do come from a variety of backgrounds. But we're going to bring in an engineer, we're going to bring in a flood modeling specialist, we're going to bring in a landscape architect, and they're doing the scoring. So you get a team approach. I think I'll go through this slide really quickly because I think I don't need to tell this particular audience that resilience is really important. But there's nationally there's a 4-to-1 benefit cost ratio for designing beyond code. Code here being, I believe it was the 2018 IBC codes. 6-to-1 if we're talking just about storm surge from hurricanes. Already a 7% discount for properties close to sea level rise compared to properties where it's not an impact. That was from State Street, I believe. There's a $7.4 billion loss in value for homes vulnerable to flooding in the southeast U.S. That is starting to trickle northward. Like we see that hitting Miami and Florida first, but that's starting to move northward. And then if we look at like what happens to repair and replacement costs over the next 30 years, First Street Foundation, who you heard from in other slides, and Arab said that there's a 25% increase in the repair and replacement costs due to climate change over the next 30 years. That number is like a 2019 number, so that's a pre-inflation number. So I think that one is certainly going to be higher in actuality. So there's a number of benefits. There's a number of benefits to wedge. At the property level, wedge is going to create savings through resilience and reduce risk through long-term planning. One of the things that we've done in developing this standard is we've gone to the insurance community, the FM Globals of the world. We have a National Flood Insurance Program expert based in New Jersey who's contributed. We tell them to take our resilience standards and redline them, beat them up, tell us where we need to change to match the guidance that the insurance community is giving to their customers, because we want the things that are in the wedge standards to be the same things that help earn you premium reductions, and in some markets just allow insurability from at the beginning. Wedge can help unlock a lot of positive media and press. As I said before, it can be really helpful for community engagement processes. There's potential savings in green infrastructure, and it really shows that you are a leader in design excellence. That's something that both communities and public and private sector project owners have found really valuable. There's a different set of benefits that happen beyond the property line. And I shared this slide because I know we've got a lot of municipal folks on the call. So for the community, you're going to see reduced flood risk, high quality public spaces, reduced stormwater burdens, workforce development and maritime jobs. That there's a workforce component of one of the credits. Robust community engagement. I think that particular one goes both ways. Helps the developer or the municipality, and then it also helps the community. There's a lot of sustainability practices that are focused on impacts to human health and things like urban heat. And then I think that design excellence one does also go both ways. So we kind of talked around wedge. Let's actually dive into what's in the standard. So there are 6 different categories. Each of these has a series of credits. And these credits focus on different areas of design. Within these, there are both design strategies. Here are the things that we have seen work on different types of sites. Here are the things that we would see as best practices that we encourage you to do. And then recognizing that every waterfront site is going to be different. Separate from those design strategies, which may or may not work depending on the site, there's a set of scoring criteria. Here are the performance measures that as a waterfront site you should be aiming for, and that's how you get your 130 out of 250 points that you need from a verification and scoring perspective. So category 0 is site assessment and planning. Here we're looking at, did you put together a multidisciplinary project team? Did you do all of the site-wide vulnerability and ecological assessments? Oftentimes a lot of things that are outside, like the typical EAS or EIS, but the things that are going to help you create a robust design, it's going to be beneficial to the community and the site. Did you implement an equitable stakeholder engagement plan? And did you follow that and incorporate both diversity in audience and diversity in opinion in the process, and then listen to it? That's one of the things that WEDG assesses for is, did your design change as a result of community engagement? Because we want to see that community feedback is actually being responded to through the design. And then there's creating a maintenance and adaptive management plan. Because WEDG is all pre-construction, we do look for a really robust maintenance plan to ensure that the project will stay in a state of good repair, and all of the benefits that come to the community will remain across the design life of the project. So category 1 is climate and hazard resilience. We start with category 0 because it's kind of all of the pre-work before you start before you're looking at the design. Category 1 is really where the design performance starts. So this is looking at climate and hazard resilience, and we're looking at how are you avoiding and reducing risk from the water body. Here's kind of a great example of the design strategies versus the performance criteria. The design strategies in avoiding and reducing flood risk from the water body are going to be things like setback further from the water. There's guidance on flood proofing. There's guidance on elevation and how to do that well in both in a coastal environment, and then cautions about it in a riverine environment. Kind of a long kind of overview of here's what works to do risk reduction on a site. Here's how floodable sites can benefit and what to think about in that. But then the performance measures are going to look at what is the design flood elevation of the site? Are you meeting different types of FEMA standards? Are you providing compensatory storage? And then importantly, are you providing protection beyond the property line? That's almost weighted equally between the protecting your own site and protecting areas beyond the property line. Those are both weighted relatively equally, because one of the benefits of WEDG projects for the community is reduced flood risk, and we want to see that there are benefits that go further. Really similar story for reducing fluvial flooding and stormwater discharge, improving stormwater discharge quality, establishing an emergency preparedness and response plan, and then urban heat is another hazard that WEDG deals with directly. Category 2 is that community access and connections component. I think you'll see here we characterize access as being with a lowercase a. It's not just public access, so that's the first category or the first credit within the category. We're also looking at how have you improved visual connections to the water? Are you supporting industrial water dependent uses? Because we want industrial access and water dependent use access to the water. How are you reducing industrial impacts to human health? Programming and educational features, transportation access, job access through maritime or environmental employment opportunities, waterfront pathway and greenway connectivity, direct connection to the water for people and boats, and then supporting diverse and sustainable maritime activity. All of these are kind of built into how we think about access and WEDG. Category 3 is edge composition. We're focused on choosing an appropriate edge for the context intended use of the site. So if we think about the spectrum of waterfront edges, you've got at one end, you've got steel and concrete in the water, bulkhead walls, pile supported platforms. And at the other end, you've got wetlands and beaches and truly natural shorelines. We want to move everybody towards the more natural end of that spectrum. while still understanding that that's not feasible everywhere. You've got erosion concerns, you've got site uses concerns, you need different types of access or stabilization needs. So we look at the site and try to figure out where there are opportunities to improve the use of nature-based features or incorporate natural features while still recognizing that those hardened structures may very well be needed. There's a credit here around maintaining or emulating natural shoreline shape and slope, protecting the working edge, and then where you have structural components, providing some ecological enhancement to those. Citing with or the natural resources and sustainability category is looking at things like ecological sensitivity, ecosystem services, ecosystem connectivity, biodiversity, avoiding human disturbance to those natural resources. And then there's a whole set of sustainability credits around cleanup of contaminated sites, sustainable fill and soil management, renewable and resilient energy sources, carbon reduction, environmentally responsible construction, reducing water use, and engaging a partner to study and monitor the site. And then innovation is just like the bonus points. So inventive design is for things that fit the concept of resilience, ecology, and access really well, that we don't recognize elsewhere in the system, but still want to reward. And then exemplary performances for those sites that really go above and beyond a particular performance metric in WEDG. If you just kind of knock it out of the park, go above and beyond WEDG, which is already above and beyond what regulatory standards would be, there's some potential extra points in there as well. There are a set of minimum requirements for WEDG. These are things that all projects need to meet before they are proceeded to review. So the first and kind of most basic one, the water's edge needs to be on the property as part of the project scope. We do get a lot of inquiries about like projects across the street from a beach that are doing really cool resilience things, really cool ecology and nature-based solutions things, but the water's edge is not on the site. It's not gonna go through WEDG. The second one is that we require projects have a soft or natural shoreline within the project bounds, or provide an ecological enhancement on a hardened shoreline. That doesn't need to be a very high bar, putting in any concrete tide pool somewhere on the site where it's otherwise completely hardened, like that can count. But we want to see something other than just steel and regular old concrete in the water on the site. You have to do community engagement as part of the process. You have to have public access on the site. Now, there's a caveat here within credit 2.1 that for industrial sites, and this is something that's coming into play with the offshore wind industry a lot, there are some kind of workarounds in the standard where if you're doing an overlook within a half mile of the site, you have an education or workforce development center on the site, you offer public tours on a regular basis. Those can count for public access where you have operational or safety concerns that keep you from having a truly publicly accessible site. We recognize that those kind of constraints are real and work around those. You have to intentionally avoid introducing invasive plant species. That's a basic requirement at site. And then we have minimum requirements for design flood elevation. And we define this as the site has to be protected to, floodproof to, or elevated to, one of those three, to different standards. So in a coastal environment, it's base flood elevation plus a foot of freeboard plus a sea level rise estimate. Inland sites, it's going to be base flood elevation plus 2, or outside the 500-year storm event. And those meet kind of the minimums for scoring within the risk reduction credits, but certainly most more points are available for building higher than this. This is the minimum. So to show you just like how does this show up on a site, I'll point to Oak Point McKinnis Cement. So I think this is a great example of a non-traditional site that was able to do this. So this was a site that got hit really hard during Sandy when they were in the cleanup of a contaminated site. This had been one of the largest illegal dumping grounds in New York City. They did tons of remediation work to clean that up. Right at the end of the remediation work, they got hit by Sandy. Did a lot of damage. They had to go back and redo a lot of work, and it kind of clicked with the design team or the owners of the site that, hey, if our building had been up, the building would have received a lot of damage. So they went back to the drawing board and really started to think more about resilience, and ended up pursuing a much more resilient design. They have a wave attenuating breakwater that's built into the outermost pier. They have a restored wetland on the site that also has wave attenuation purposes. They do have public access through a walkway that doesn't get in the way of operations at all. There's a couple nonprofits that use that space for programming. And then they elevated all the structures out of the 2050 floodplain. So thinking about kind of how municipalities can use WEDG, there's a number of ways that WEDG shows up in policy. And I think the overall thing that I want to really emphasize here is that WEDG, and by extension Waterfront Alliance, can be your partner. If you have goals for resilience in the community, talk to us. There are ways that we can use WEDG to really help you meet your goals. So in New Rochelle, we show up in the zoning code, particularly for waterfront multifamily residential units. In New York, there's a couple places where we show up in the land use review process. Port Authority of New York and New Jersey has embedded WEDG within its sustainable infrastructure guidelines. As I mentioned before, Camden has what's called the WEDG addendum, which kind of ties to different local ordinances. Wilmington, among others, used WEDG on a public sector site. And then Miami, Florida has multiple ordinances around WEDG, and including using WEDG in a set of design guidelines for part of the riverfront in Miami. So as we think about kind of how WEDG can show up in policy, there's an extent to which LEED is kind of shows a lot of precedent. There's hundreds and hundreds of communities across the country, large and small, everything from New York City to towns of 1,000 people, that have policies and have set standards around LEED, and that's kind of the model that we follow for what the different options are. So there can be public project requirements for WEDG verification. Miami, the ordinances that the city commission directs the city manager to use WEDG and Vision, depending on the location of the site, be considered in city capital project design. This is particularly around stormwater solutions, but they've said we want to use this on public sector projects. There are potential financial incentives. There are things like density bonuses and other incentives. Zoning and design guidelines is something where WEDG can be incorporated. How that shows up in Miami is that basically WEDG is set up as a waiver for their Baywalk and Riverwalk design guidelines. They've set really high standards for developers, but told developers, if you're pursuing WEDG, you can go around some of our other requirements because we know that their standard is going to be well aligned with ours, and that gives the developer a little more flexibility while still holding them to a very high standard. This is the zoning code in New Rochelle for their R1WF10 district. It's their waterfront district. And this is specific to waterfront multifamily developments. You have to comply with WEDG design guidelines or equivalent as determined by the planning board. And I think that this or equivalent is actually a really important thing to note, because that is also how a lot of LEED policies are set up. So there are a number of policies across the country where you have a density bonus or an expectation that you have to hit LEED standards on a building, but the actual language will be like LEED or other similar building standard. WEDG can serve as that building standard for places that need a more customized approach to a waterfront site. So to go back to this list, there's also potential permitting incentives that can be set up. Things like, you go through your local review process or kind of cut the line faster if you're pursuing WEDG. Tax abatement, something that a few communities have started exploring. resilience financing is more of a state solution than a local one, but something worth exploring. And then there's a number of places where WEDG has shown up in community planning processes. I've as a consultant before this role, worked on the comprehensive plan for the borough of Leonia in Bergen County. And there's a number of ways that WEDG can show up in processes like these. So we are part of referenced multiple times in describing the Eco Shorelines and Developed Coast Guidance and Best Practices for New Jersey DEP. Bunch of folks who are part of NJCRC, who are the authors of that, John Miller, Laura Karen, others. We're part of the Climate Resilient Design Standards and Guidelines for public rights of way in Boston. We're part of the Green Guidelines for Battery Park City. There's lots of ways that as you're doing these larger scale planning processes, you can embed WEDG and WEDG principles into those projects to kind of help guide future development, even if there's not a particular site in mind yet. From a permitting and grants perspective, if we look at what the expectations are around permits and what different grant requirements, things like BRIC or port infrastructure development grants require you to do, there's a lot of alignment. So WEDG provides third-party verification that a site's going beyond code. That's something that if you're the regulator, if you're the grant reviewer, that's something that can be useful to see that there's we're seeing that projects are going above and beyond code for community engagement, environmental justice, habitat space, sensitive habitats, biodiversity and ecosystems, green infrastructure, and nature-based features, flood protections, particularly for the adjacent community. You can show a lot of those community benefits in these processes and kind of earn a little more favor with the reviewers. WEDG verification is kind of the caveat there. Does come after grants and permits are going to be awarded, because we're looking at 100% CDs. That the workaround there is just that the language that you're using for grant application stuff should be pursuing WEDG verification. And then Waterfront Alliance is always happy to write kind of letters of support and things where it's helpful for projects doing that. And this is exactly what the offshore wind industry did with NYSERDA in New York and the Board of Public Utilities in New Jersey. They used WEDG to show that the states that, hey, we want to be good neighbors. We want to have really resilient and sustainable ports. Here is the group that's going to hold us to those really high standards, and built WEDG right into their proposals. That's the same kind of thing that you can do with different federal funding sources. So even if the WEDG is not named in like BRIC requirements, pursuing WEDG positions you really well to get those kind of external funding. And there's also a finance aspect to WEDG. It's a little less applicable to municipalities, but we do find that investors like looking at WEDG, because it's hard for an investor to tell, is what this project's telling me about how they're going to be resilient, is that legit or not? We can kind of provide that validation that it is. The same kind of thing is true in ESG investing. ESG is environment, social governance. That's is my money doing good for the world kind of check. We're embedded in one of the rating systems for that and kind of play that same validation role. And then, as I mentioned before, we have alignment with NFIP and groups like FM Global to ensure that there is alignment in what insurance carriers care about from a resilience perspective and the design strategies and performance criteria in WEDG. So we have what's called the WEDG Professionals course, something that anyone kind of working in this space, working on coastal resilience or working on inland waterways, towns and riverfronts, and anyone that's kind of got that needs resilient waterfronts, encourage you to enroll in the course at wedgeprofessionals.org. This is a 6-hour course. You get AIA or ASLA credits for it if you need those. A 6-hour course that goes through the standard in depth, but you also, and this is the real value of it, you don't just see what's actually in the standard, but you hear from engineers and architects and landscape architects on here's how we embedded this into our project. So you'll hear from the park in Wilmington, North Carolina, the park in Miami, the cement plant in the Bronx, to say, here's how we incorporated wedge, here's how we thought about all of these different challenges. And those case studies are really valuable to hear. And that course is at wedgeprofessionals.org. So before we switch to Q&A, I wanted to just outline what are the easy what's the low-hanging fruit if you are in a municipality or working with a municipality for engaging with wedge. So the first thing is engage in the wedge professionals course. It's wedgeprofessionals.org. That has a public sector discount built into it. Get your team familiar with it. It's a great kind of overview course on resilient, ecological, and accessible design. Get a couple staff working on these issues into the course. We have on our website a scorecard that allows you to very quickly go through and see is a project that we're working on, how is it going to score in wedge? There's a scorecard that you can take in about 10 minutes if you know the project well, to just run through, calculate your point totals. So start to use that as a guide in the planning process. Doesn't commit you to pursuing wedge verification, because there's a fee to pursuing verification, of course, but you can go through and see, how does this project line up? And that can be a useful kind of conversation starter with the design team, with your planning boards. And then we're also then happy to talk through it with you as well. If you're doing, your regular comprehensive plans that now have that climate component into it, are incorporated in it, include wedge. Think about the principles in wedge. Think about verification as part of those upcoming plans. And then the final one, the easiest one, if you've got ideas, if you've got goals around resilience in the community, you've got a lot of development on the waterfront coming up, call Waterfront Alliance. We're happy to talk through kind of how wedge can be useful to you. We're happy to give a version of this presentation to your planning board, to the borough administrator, the different stakeholder groups in the community. Use us as a resource. We want to see your waterfronts be more resilient, ecological, and accessible. So there's my contact information. You have it, Sutkowi at waterfrontalliance.org. I'd love to take any questions from the group that are out there.
Thank you, Joseph. If there are any questions at this time, you can go ahead and raise your hand and come off mute. We do have one question in the chat so far, Joseph. We have Tiara coming from the Milwaukee River Estuary up in the Great Lakes. And one of her goals of her research is finding what went wrong to wetland attempts in the Great Lakes. So they have experienced their highest water and lowest water levels in the last 10 years. And this 6-foot swing is significant to design for sessile plants. So have you encountered any estuary sites that have been similar to the site that she's working on in the Great Lakes?
I mean, the swing in the Great Lakes, particularly it's Lake Michigan and Lake Huron that have the most significant water level variations. That waterfront swing was incredible. So I was at a presentation a couple months ago where they showed 2 news articles from, I think it was from Duluth, so a couple 100 miles north of Milwaukee, where in what would have been maybe 2015 or so, they were begging the Army Corps for dredging money because ships couldn't enter the harbor anymore. And then in 2020, just a couple of years later, they were having all of these flood issues on their wharves and their piers because the water level was 6 feet higher. This is, I think, Lake Michigan and Lake Huron are the case studies for what sea level rise is going to look like. What we did in wedge, because this poses a challenge for the performance metrics in wedge. How do you accommodate this kind of unanticipated swing that will continue to vary and is not that predictable more than a couple of years out. We ask sites to do very similar standards to the coastal standard in WEDG for design flood elevation, but then do a separate water level analysis that basically says what happens if we hit record water levels again. Is the site still resilient to that? But I would say there are a couple places, particularly in on the eastern coast of Canada and up in Maine, that have really significant tidal shifts, but I don't think there are a lot of estuary sites that have gone through an unpredicted shift like Milwaukee has. I will say that our first, so we released the inland version of WEDG. So WEDG started as purely a coastal standard. It was released originally in 2015, nationally applicable coastal standard in 2019. About 2 weeks ago, we released the inland version. And our first inland site that's currently undergoing review is about 50 miles south of Milwaukee. So will serve as kind of a good case study for this. It's a breakwaters and beach nourishment project. But they're having to look at the lake levels as well. So I don't have a great answer for Milwaukee because it's a really hard challenge that nobody else is really going through to the same extent.
I hear you. Thank you for that. It was that 50. Is that Calumet Harbor?
It is not. I can't share what it is.
Okay.
As projects are going through review, they're considered confidential until they pass. So I can't share what it is.
Great. Well, I'll look forward to finding out. Let's stay in contact. I'll send you my report so far so you can see the other ones we're looking at.
I'd love that.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the group? We've got about 10 minutes left. I'm happy to answer anything I can.
Joseph, you had mentioned for the update for WEDG, was there any New Jersey representation in the discussions for the update?
Yes, so the update was guided by, I mean, there were probably 75 to 100 people who played a role in kind of devising updates to the technical standards in WEDG. We are very intentional about going to a really broad base of folks, but the overarching process and the kind of final sign off does come from a technical advisory committee that Waterfront Alliance put together. And in that we had our flood insurance expert is New Jersey based. We had the New Jersey Department of Environmental Protection on that. We had John Miller from Stevens Institute as part of that. So New Jersey was actually really well represented in the update process, and that was very intentional. That New Jersey both faces coastal flooding issues as well as inland, and we also wanted to take advantage of all of the expertise that groups that agencies like NJDEP have. So it was Frank McLaughlin from DEP, because I think I saw someone from DEP in the chat. It's Frank McLaughlin who leads the Community Connections program down in Camden, but they were very heavily involved in that process.
Great.
Joe, I have a question for you too. Are there any smaller communities that have used WEDG for public sites?
Yes, so right now the town of Westport, Connecticut has 3 different projects under review. That's a town of, I want to say they're like 20 to 25,000 maybe. And one of their rationales was that they don't have a city like New York or a city like Hoboken or have lots of requirements on waterfront communities. They've got specialized zoning, specialized waterfront planning districts. A lot of the smaller communities don't have that because you've got a small number of sites, limited staff. It's hard to have that kind of expertise in-house. So that's really why Westport, Connecticut was really interested in pursuing WEDG in some of their projects, because they saw WEDG as kind of a stand-in for some of that. That's also why New Rochelle, just not that small of a community, but the same rationale. They said rather than kind of create all of these waterfront standards, we can just kind of assign WEDG to be that, since the access goals and the environmental goals match with what we're trying to do. WEDG can kind of serve that role. The Lake Michigan project that I mentioned earlier will actually be a fairly rural project. It's not actually based in an urban area. And WEDG works with those kind of environments just as well.
How much does the WEDG verification cost for a site normally?
So the typical review, and it depends. There's a difference in public and private sector. It's a lower cost for public sector sites. It also matters if you're doing the preliminary plus final review or just the final review. But the review can start as low as I think 9,000, and then it scales with the capital cost of the project. So it's in line and a little lower than like LEED and Envision and the other standards you might use. I think the best, my favorite characterization of WEDG is that we're the friendlier version of LEED. So with kind of that review process, you do get a lot of kind of hand-holding and coaching guidance throughout the process. Like once a project is decided, yes, we're gonna pursue WEDG, we want to make sure that you get kind of the full value out of that verification fee, and we make the process as easy and as streamlined as possible.
Thank you, Joseph. Do we have any more questions for our speaker today? Okay. Just as a reminder, this coffee chat is being recorded and it will be posted to the NJCRC website at the end of this session. I'll go ahead and put that into the chat for you all. And also, as a reminder, if you're interested in learning more about being a partner of the NJCRC, membership is free. And so we do have a partner agreement form that we can also put up in the chat for you. And before we head out today, I do have a poll to launch for you all regarding today's coffee chat. I want to thank Joseph for being here with us today and talking about his WEDG guidelines. Kiara said she really appreciates this and it will help her inform her request for proposal.
And that's something where we've been embedded in a number of RFPs as a requirement for the design team, both for have a WEDG associate on the team and design this to WEDG standards. So RFP is a great place to start.
Great. And as we have folks filling out the poll, I'm just going to put your contact information up. So for anyone who would like to reach out for Joseph at the end of this, his email is there. Thanks again, everybody. I would like to put in a plug for our next coffee chat. It's going to be on January 23rd at 10 a.m. And we are going to talk about a new guide that was released for local climate change adaptation planning. And this was curated by New Jersey Future. We have some guest speakers from DEP, New Jersey Future, and also Sustainable New Jersey. So thanks everybody for joining us this morning, this Monday morning. Hope your coffee was warm. And
Thank
have
you
a
so
great
much,
day.
everyone.
Thank you.